Welcome everyone to today's webinar over decoding the digital advantage in freight brokerage. I was reading a LinkedIn post from someone in the industry, I think it was Cassandra Gaines or somebody, covering a panel that they were doing at a recent conference, and a handful of the comments leaned in the direction that most of the marketing out there around digital transformation really only talks about the obvious ones, efficiency and time, but that really leaves a gap in information and how it can lead to the things that we sort of care about and don't usually get mentioned: higher pay for carriers and lower cost to shippers, essentially tying that digital advantage to price and benefiting, I guess you could call it, all parts of the logistics ecosystem, from shipper, carrier, broker, and that last one that gets overlooked, people. And when I was thinking about how we can, here at Cargo Chief, market a certain message around results, one of the key drivers for us is that we actually do have our own rating engine, so tying things back to price, but we position our software called C4 around procurement and automation. And so to that point, I'm Chris Arredondo, co-founder and VP of Customer Success here at Cargo Chief, where I handle pretty much everything customer related. I thought the best person to help sort of shed some light on today's topic about that digital advantage would be one of our customers, Concept Logistics, and Greg Finnerty, VP of Operations there at Concept. Greg, we've known each other, I don't know, going on like a year or so. I think we met at the last TIA show in San Diego. Yeah. And you guys have been with us for like roughly 6 months or now. So I guess, can you share a little bit more about your business, what you do, and really what makes Concept unique?
Yeah, Concept is a mainly truckload broker coming out of Buffalo, New York. We've been in business for almost 35 years now. I've been here 23 of them myself. I was a spring chicken when we started. But you know, what makes us unique, I guess, is the relationship piece and how much that was stressed even early on in this company. It's the people, it's the relationships we have with people inside this company and outside. So carriers and shippers, you know, we consider that under one umbrella of our customers. And that really, I think, has been carrying us through we've relied on it heavily, let's say, in the last couple of years through the turbulent times of the market. But, you know, when we are now expanding out and, you know, we have had some rapid growth, and we're figuring out that, you know, when it was 6 people in office and now it's 26 in an office and 43 in the company overall, we really have to rely on some technology and bring it in and leverage the relationships and the base points and our values to spread what we do and bring that forward into our new areas.
Yeah, I talk a lot to brokers, and culture and people and talent is one of the drivers that always leads to that growth. So it's a really unique thing. And if you haven't really thought about looking at a brokerage from that angle, rather than just sort of a load count growth numbers basis, that's really what's going to help you drive that. So on the lineup today, we're going to talk about what a digital brokerage is and really what that digital advantage looks like. We'll tie this back into price, but maybe not in the same way that you're thinking today, since it's not really just about having a rating engine. Then we'll sort of go over some of the wins and fears, at least from what I hear from talking to, I don't know, probably more than 1,000 brokers here in this last year, just like you guys. Then we'll get into kind of how Greg and his team at Concept approached a digital transformation and really handled that product adoption. I'd say just because you have a shiny new tool doesn't mean that everyone's going to use it in the same way. So first topic here, what is a digital brokerage? The first layer that we usually see, and sort of, I guess you could call it the backbone of how we got started here at Cargo Chief, was a way to process and capture carrier information to match freights. And I think when you think traditionally, most people are tracking that information in a spreadsheet or notepads or notebooks or sticky notes, just for that stuff to get tossed at the end of the day. The other issue is that with those spreadsheets, Bill, Tom, Susie, they're all tracking different information that leads to inconsistencies. And when you're trying to like interact or have your freight or your loads interact with those carriers that are in a spreadsheet in real time through your TMS, it just doesn't happen. Needless to say too, like when carriers call in on your freight, most people today don't really have a way to capture that information, where that carrier is running that freight with somebody. It's just that the way to capture that information is really difficult. And so that's really sort of how like we evolved our sort of digital matching experience. And Greg's going to talk a little bit more about that later. I'd say the other piece is having coverage beyond just what's in your own network. I like to talk about some of these things and sort of like a cell phone example, like a cell phone carrier. If you've got a low end carrier like, I don't know, Cricket or Boost Mobile, Mint I don't think is no longer a lower end carrier. They I think they were acquired by Verizon, so I can't use that example anymore. But the other two, as you know, if you're on that sort of cell phone provider, then you switch to Verizon, you're pretty much like tripling or 10xing your coverage immediately. And that's sort of like how the sort of larger network attributes to like what you can do. So on the carrier side, for an example, you might only have, you know, your top 2 to 3 carriers on a given lane. We could just call it Houston to Atlanta. Like that's the lane that you run with that carrier. And that's really all you know. You don't really know, you know, that carrier might have 45 trucks, but you don't really know what else they're running. And that's sort of the drawback to having just, you know, the traditional way of capturing capacity. The other side is how you can sort of take those networks. Like, you know, now all of a sudden, you know, what that carrier runs. They're probably running 100 lanes. You just never had a way to capture it. But now that you do know sort of like what lanes those carriers are running, you can sort of turn that into new shipper relationships, I'd say, and like even new opportunities, whether it's like existing ones that you've had in the past or new ones that are coming up, and really give you a better way to procure carriers and also win that freight. And we do this with a feature called Projects that Greg's probably going to walk through a little bit to help understand how him and his team make that connection. We here at Cargo Chief don't really handle tracking. So the sort of third bullet here, that real tracking component, we don't really handle that, but there are several tools out there that do. And this was probably one of the first pieces to creating that digital brokerage. And I saw it happening in real time when I was at C.H. Robinson 10 years ago. It was interesting when, you know, back in 2013, that was when like tracking just first came out on somebody's cell phone, and carriers were like, dude, don't track me, lose my number. Like, I'm not accepting your ping. And it was really, really tough to get them to do that. And this is a C.H. Robinson, right? And they're a really large company, even back then, one of the first to invest in that technology space. And it's like getting them to do that it took 10 years in a pandemic to fast forward to today. It's almost a requirement. Many brokerages are promoting that 90%, 99% real-time tracking and visibility of shipments. And it's just, you know, that's one of the first components, at least what I saw. And definitely not the last. And there are probably others when it comes to like document processing and stuff. But the other piece to really digitizing and looking at that digital sense of a brokerage is having software to help you with priority. I tend to ask, you know, whether it's new prospects, customers, or even people that we hire from like the brokerage industry, I'll usually ask, how do you determine priority? And when we think about brokerage, for me, at least when I was booking freight, it was whatever hit the wall at 7 a.m. when I walked in the office, that's what determined my priority. And it sucked, and it was hard to catch up. And I was constantly just, you know, I had work to do, but if I'm moving 20 loads a day or whatever my load count is, like each point is a moment of interruption. There could be something that goes wrong every time. And so when you think about, you know, digitizing, it's not just like your efficiencies and time savings and stuff like that, but really thinking about some of these things that maybe you haven't quite thought of. I'd say some of the top advantages that we see, at least from brokers that I talk to and customers, are really through sourcing that helps drive the price, followed by sort of like on-point matching from having that visibility across not just your own network and your own carriers and your own freight, but complete carrier profiles made from freight that they're already running across multiple brokerages that leads to higher booking rates. Because if you're only looking at your freight, you could be, and we see this sometimes too, you know, $1 billion broker, they're still isolated to just what they know, just their own freight. They don't really have anything else that goes beyond that, especially when they, you know, build out their own TMS. There's not really like cross coverage or cross correlated networks. And, you know, again, a little bit more how we do that is really, and I guess how we build out our digital capacity engine is aggregating and consolidating those lane makeups from every transaction that we process. it's a really, happy to talk more about that. Not going to get too into that today. So I just really, if anyone wants to hear, and I think we're going to launch something at the end. So if you want to hear more about how we do that, happy to talk, and we'll launch a poll there at the end, so you can always submit a yes or no. But Greg, I want to sort of tie this back to price and talk about how sourcing leads to, not just higher pay for carriers and favorable rates for shippers, but also sort of how you guys close the loop on this sort of procurement angle. Because I know when we were talking last week or early this week, you mentioned driving price downward, especially in this market. Like price is what is going to get you the freight or lose you the freight. But at the same time, finding the right rate for carriers that keeps your core guys running. So I guess to kind of start with sourcing and maybe take us through what that journey looks like.
All right. I mean, when you think of this on a whole level, right? Like you have a sales team out there really busting their butt to go get you some freight, right? And it's not easy right now. 6 to 8 months, a year ago, freight was flying at you and you didn't know what to do. But now you have some people working really hard to do that, right? And you want to make sure that you're capturing every possibility that comes through your door. So, traditionally, even a couple of years ago, what we would do is you get a load in, you'd go to the boards and you go, and if you didn't already know a carrier because you've been working through it with them for a very long time, and it was a lane outside of your regular, what you did on an everyday basis, you'd have to go to the boards and you'd have to see if this was going to be something that would work, and then go back to the price, and hopefully it all worked, right? And it was very chaotic. It's very random, right? So I think when we kind of bring that into sourcing, right, we're taking a better approach at it. We're taking a smarter approach. We want to make sure that when we approach a lane or an opportunity, we're actually doing everything we can. It's not just go to the boards and see what happens. Yeah, sometimes that has to happen, obviously. But when we can take a smarter and better approach, and we can look at it holistically, or we can reapproach something that we've already seen, this is kind of where C4 fit some needs for us in that aspect. We can go in and search these lanes in or out of network carriers. We can go and talk to people we already know. Because I think one of the pieces that we have found in our growth is that a lot of our business, our new business, came from existing customers, right? I mean, that's the old standby. 80% of your new growth is going to come from old customers, right?
Yeah.
Well, why wouldn't that be the same for your carriers?
Yeah.
Right. So that's when we're talking sourcing. I don't want to limit it to brand new carriers. I want to talk to our carriers about what they actually do, because I think I've said this before in a couple of different places, but I'm assuming that their major lanes aren't coming to Buffalo, New York, right? But do they know we do outside of Buffalo, New York, right? And I think that's a piece that when we source the capacity, we're talking to the carriers we already know, and we're gathering all that information, and we're making sure we have coverage on the lanes we do with carriers that we want. And then we can kind of expand into what's the win-win for all of us, right? Because Chris, I think I said this yesterday, but it's got to be a triangle of wins.
Yeah.
Right? Carrier's got to win, the shipper's got to win, and for me to stay in business and make it all happen, I've got to win too.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we kind of bring that all together? So when you bring in sourcing and you've got the coverage and you're making it buy, how do you get ahead of that? How do you do that? And I think it's in that carrier management piece where you are now taking your lot of carriers and in your specific loads, and you can build it off the loads you're already doing, or you can build it off of new prospecting lanes that your sales team's going out there to get. But you're managing carriers in the sense that first, you're going to find out everything that they do. You're going to be able to grab that and bring it into the system. And then you're going to be able to talk to them about what else you are seeing. If you've got a great relationship with a carrier and you've got a guy that's kind of the fringe guy, right? That's kind of sitting out there and he kind of does some loads and he does it for an okay price.
Yeah.
But sometimes he beats your main carrier or one of your good relationships on a lane that that carrier would thrive in. That's information you can bring forward in a centralized place to really expand the relationship with that carrier. Hey, just so you know, right? I'm getting quotes at this price in this lane. This is a lane I know is good for you. You know is good for you. Where can we be?
Yeah.
Right. And bringing it up to the carrier diversity part, I think this is where you expand that. Right now, when I bring my team into carrier management, I want them to have, is it always possible? No, but I want them to have 10 carriers per lane, and I want them to have core carriers in those lanes. And we have our own secret sauce that we put in as KPIs of what makes a core carrier to a certain lane.
Yeah.
But when you bring in the carrier diversity, now hey, I have this lane that's very similar to this lane, and they're a number 4 over here, but with my carrier relationship, my customer relationship, they could be the core carrier here, and we could pick up some more business, right? So that's where the diversity piece comes into it. And that's where I think the partnership comes in, right? Like when we're working together on a consistent basis, right? We're not just talking about, hey, I got a load today. You've done it before. It's here to here. Great. Send it over, right? Like that's awesome. And that's the way that we've done business for a long time. But I think to stand out to both, right? Like, who do you want to keep happy on everything? And Chris, you mentioned people. I think two of the biggest parties in this equation are the guys that are loading on the dock and the drivers, right? Like those are two people I want to make a conscious effort that they're being they're as happy as the dispatchers and brokers on my side, and the guys making the decisions in the logistics office on the customer side.
Yeah.
So if we can get them on consistent in a consistent place that they like each other, they know the job, they can go in, get loaded, they're making some decisions, and we can make some arrangements for them. Hey, if we could do this every day at 3:30, I know you guys close at 3, or you know what I mean? Things like that have to happen for the world to go round. And when you have a partnership, those are going to be a lot more tangible than just calling a guy and saying your guy's going to be late, and it's some random guy you've never talked to. And you know what? Your half hour just turned into 3 hours. And now you've got a whole team at your shipper's house, place screaming down you. And then the sales, so it's just chaotic. So this is where partnerships and relationships have always meant a lot to us, right? If we can really dive into that and bring it to a granular level and make everybody happy, I think that's the key to it. And again, it kind of comes all into how do you get that? And I think that's where the C4 piece, for at least for concept, came in, right? We're able to source that capacity quickly and efficiently.
Yeah. The sort of price component, like, I've always, at least when I was booking freight, it was like, I'm talking to shippers or getting new shippers, and they'd be throwing freight at me to quote. And it's great whenever you have that opportunity. The hard thing is actually getting them. And that's when the price component, like a lot of shippers don't really like, all right, what's different from you from the other 99 that just called me last week? Like, what's different from like what this brokerage is going to provide? And there's different ways to look at that. But like, when I talk to brokers, and even you guys too, like it's really everything together is what's unique about you. And that's what's going to help. It's not just going to be like, all right, we're trying to get this load as a shipper moved for $1,000. Can you do it? Well, somebody came in at $9.99 and outbid me. Like, that's not necessarily like the game that really strategic brokers play. It's not just come with the lowest price possible, but like if it is $9.50, what are you going to get with it, right? And like that's sort of like going back to the carrier side. Like if you're able to do all these things, like have on point sourcing and dynamic coverage and carrier management, and just looking at things differently, and you can have this capacity in hand, like you talked about before. You guys sort of like sell things like almost as if it's a commodity, right? Like you go to your shippers and your customers and you're like, this is what we've got at, this many carriers, this many options. But also on the carrier side, like, hey, this is the lane makeup that we've got for you. Like, walk us through sort of like that.
Yeah, well, I guess, to your point, right? Like, I think we try to make capacity tangible, right? Yeah. Like, I think that's where we really concentrate on a difference, right? Where we're trying to leverage our relationships and be the sales team for the carrier, right? That more than likely doesn't have a sales team, right? They're kind of doing their local next door neighbor started a trucking, like this, that's kind of how it went for a long time. And I think on the other end of that, for the shippers, we're trying to be advisors to all parties. So if we have capacity in lanes that are strong for our customer or they're not, we want to be in on that conversation. What are your sales goals? Well, if you guys target this, we've already got this. You already know where you're going to be. We don't have to play the quote game.
Yeah.
Right. You got a broker or you got a relationship with Concept that is going to stand by you and help you through this new market, because, talking about fears and risks, like that's a fear for a lot of people, and going into a new market and how you're going to do it and the pricing and, hey, you quoted me this and now it's this. Like, we try to arm everybody with as much information as we possibly can. But going back to even carrier management, when we're in there and we're talking through with both the customer and the carrier, this is where we can give a little bit of advantage too, where the market's shifting. We're seeing other quotes come in. We're seeing other pricing dynamics happen. We're seeing the market switch. We're having that proactive conversation with our carrier, and we can proactively go back to our customer now and say, hey, we're able to lower this to this. Will that work for you? Because that will keep my core carrier on this. That's going to keep the guy that's been doing it for the last 3 years or 3 months or 3 weeks on this load, and they're doing a great job. They track. Your guys on the docks love them. You know what I mean? All those things, that consistency stays, right? Because I think that's one of the biggest predictors that in business we can have is consistency.
Yeah. I've had that point in the relationship when you come to it with a carrier and they're just like, talking about tracking, like that was never a thing that I ever had, at least at a brokerage.
It's always been a struggle.
Yeah. It's always been that piece that was always hard to get carriers to do. But when a carrier can just text you like, hey, I'm loaded at 8 a.m. before you even walk in, you've already got that thing knocked off. And that's like, even when you were talking too about the dock workers, like they inform that dock worker that like the driver said like, hey, Dan, I'm running a little bit late.
Yeah.
Can you push me through the what's it called? It's been a while since I booked freight. The
the cutoff time.
The station. The guard shack. There you go.
There you go.
Can you get me through there quicker? And like that's sort of like, that's what comes with like that advantage, right? And like you're sort of, it's not in like how many calls and emails can I make, what's the lowest price that I can do, but like what else can I provide my carriers and my shippers, dock workers, and everybody. And it's really crazy to think like that. It's so hard to get to that point. Like, unless
takes a long time.
It takes the right experience sometimes. Like I talk to a lot of brokers, and I'll throw a curveball at you. I'm curious on this one. We in down times, right? Like when the market's soft and price is just, you've got to win on price and you got to win on relationships. A lot of companies use this, like, digital freight matching and automation to gain market share. Like they're going to their shippers to, like, the worst thing you can say is, no, I can't take that load. If you've got that opportunity, then like, hey, let's try it. Maybe we lose the first couple, but giving us a chance to like actually take it. Then instead of one load, we've all of a sudden got, like you said, 80% of your business is going to come from your existing customers. Right. Now we can grow that load count to 20 loads. Like, how do you see like gaining market share, like from relationships that you build, but also like, the opportunity from your shippers? Is that sort of like what you guys do too?
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing better than having a customer, first off, recommend you because you're trustworthy. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's where that you lean on those relationships to go, because when it gets tough for a broker, that means that, it's tough for carriers and shippers are getting, beat down the doors, right? Like it's how do I get rid of this? How do I take this off my plate? So, you know, when we can kind of work into the relationship piece with our carriers, keep them on the lanes they do, keep things steady as the water's rocking, and we can keep the customer you know, relationship kind of, I want to say, like, less chaotic, right?
Yeah.
At that point,
Yeah.
I think that's a win for us. And again, you're taking a lot off of other people's plates, right? Like, the biggest gift we can give other people is time, right? And I think that's where we kind of really start to work into that type of mindset. I mean, I can tell you probably our top 5 customers, we did a poll on them, and, you know, how are we doing type of thing, and not one of them mentioned price and why they do business with us.
Yeah.
Right. And I can tell you right now, in no way, shape, or form, and I can say this with absolute certainty, are we taking advantage of anything like that at all? Right.
Yeah.
Like, we're here to do business by our values. And I think that's where it shows.
Yeah. You know, moving on to the wins and fears here, but I remember I had a large customer, Nestle Waters, and the dispatch contact there was Chibi, and I remember telling her, hey, if we can, like, I'll take this overflow freight. I need it at this price, because let me tell you, I'm gonna get you home at 5 o'clock. Yeah. I don't want you staying here. Neither do I. I don't want to get home. I've got about an hour and a half of traffic. So, like, let's get this shit moving and let's get it booked.
Let's roll.
Yeah, it's that time, and like, how, like, really executing to delivering on what you say, right?
Exactly. Integrity, right?
So you know, some wins and fears, I guess, is what we'd call it from brokers. And we, you know, you talk to a lot of people there at conferences, and even people and carriers and shippers and stuff. And likewise here, like, as you know, we bring customers on to our platform and our integrations. The obvious ones, like I said earlier, are the gains, efficiency, and time savings. That otherwise, what is automation for? Like, that's sort of where it starts. Going a little bit beyond, and like more partnerships or enhanced coverage, even with like some of the fears, right? Like, some of the, like, we hear some of just the objections, like, to, like, hey, this isn't the right time for us, or whatever reason, like, the guy's out, we're trying to hire people right now, or just the financial investment or risk of failure. I guess, Greg, share a little bit about, I guess, that process of, like, what are some of the gains, but what were also some of the, like, hesitations that you had before? Because I know, you know, you use some other tools as well, not just us, but like your TMS, right? That was a shift, and that was just layering it. So, like, walk us through, like, the wins and where your mind was at.
Well, when we kind of entered into the technology stack and we started really investing ourselves into it and what we needed, I look at one major rule I have, right? I have to have a need for it before I bring it in, right? Yeah. So with our TMS, with Ty, who's been a great partner to us, you know, they helped us bring all of our rates in a truckload quoting page, right? A really nice page that really dials in your tech stack and brings it all into one. So you're really dialed in on information, and you've got everything you need to book the load efficiently.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of runs right into the time savings. I think, you know, with what we found is, how do we get our load out quicker? How do we get it to our people, our core carriers and the people we rely on faster? How can we make it easier for them to book? You know, especially in tough times where they're getting bombarded with calls. A little bit different right now, but, you know, 2 years ago when we switched over, it was a little bit different story, right? So how do I get it over there with as much ease as possible with everything they need? And I think that's where kind of like time savings and reduced cost per load comes in, because you're not banging phones, and you're building your relationship. So, you know, what I had what I had my carrier reps kind of run in to do is say, hey, let's go over what you like, what you don't. Let's get into some real information. Let's talk about, you know, your deadhead that you want to commit to. Let's talk about what you need rate per mile. Let's start to match up some of the loads. Where would you go that you're not right now? What are you doing that we're not capturing right now? Do your guys need to come home on weekends? You know, all that kind of stuff. And bringing it all together into that's where you start to build on the carrier side, these partnerships that are really, really becoming that much stronger, right? Because you're caring about what they care about.
Yeah.
I think, that to me on the carrier side of things is far beyond worth anything more than that, right? And flexibility, enhanced coverage, those are all the benefits. But where we saw the need come in was when we were trying to procure.
Yeah.
Right. We needed to source more capacity, better capacity, get a better look, and have a place to store it, because you alluded to it. Tommy, Bobby, Susie, they're all flying around on Excel sheets and notepads, and they're, hey, yelling across the room. And it creates excitement, but you've got to manage chaos.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we've really been able to leverage C4 specifically, and other tech tools as well, is to manage that chaos and bring in those needs. When we first started, I think some of the real challenges was, one, change is hard, right? Workflow change is hard. But I think with, and I'll speak specifically to C4 and Cargo Chief, but like, you're already doing this work.
Yeah.
We're just organizing it. We're just, get out of your Excel sheet and get into something that the company can benefit from. It's belief, right? How does this make everyone around me better? And that's in your people. And that's really how it kind of how it goes. I think a lot of, and I know we were there at one point, probably around like 2016, 17, like we were like, oh, this tech piece looks awesome, but what's the reality of it? Or, I don't know, I'm a little nervous on this. And it's like, they're sharing my network, I'm giving away information, and all those things kind of come into you, and you get fearful. But what you got to understand is if you're fearful of that, how are you using your information? That's what you've got to start paying attention to.
Yeah.
Right. You've got to use your information better. Right. And I think that's where technology comes in into play, at least here at Concept, is that we really start to understand what we're using, use that data to better our people, arm them with better tools to do their jobs better.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to bring a knife to a gunfight. Right. So how do we take all this and bring it together? And I think that's where kind of like the digital freight brokerage gets a lot of, whoa, it's just a bunch of robots zipping around, jets and friggin' flying saucers are picking me up after work. That's not the case, right? It starts and ends with your people and how you as a company are using that information you're now capturing in an efficient way.
Yeah, it's the one thing that I always hear is like, Chris, how are we going to like grow? Like, if you're not giving us like direct shippers, like which isn't like, people try to go 0 to 100 and just like, I can't just give you shippers. Like, if I gave you shippers, what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to, are you just going to call them the same thing that you're doing? Like, what's going to be different if you had, the difference today versus yesterday? Like, if you had a shipper list, like, what's going to be different about it? And it's like always learning. And what we hear too is like that cost per load. And like, it's the cost per load today is, I mean, it's different than what it was before. I know when I was at CH, I've never seen it done before, but also that freight was much different in 2010 or 2013. And like, cost per load was like $45 a load. Like, that's impossible almost now. It's like, because of the technology that has to come into play, when you do that exercise of like, what's my direct cost per load and indirect cost, and then total, it's like, usually what we hear is somewhere around like 80 to 120 or so, somewhere around that mix, which means you got to make $81 a load to actually make a profit. Because and it's like, there's those small wins of, I've heard cost per loads of up to like 190, and that just depends on their freight mix and their freight makeup. So they can afford a little bit more cost per load because their margin may be a little bit different and they're taking in more volume. So really, like, a lot of times there's money sitting right there on the table. It's just about cost reduction to increase that margin gap. And if you can reduce it, like you said, banging the phones, like that's time gone, time wasted. Even like we don't do compliance, but we partner with my carrier packets that they reduce that compliance time from, traditionally it's 30 minutes, maybe an hour if you're checking references. If you're booking, and we did a webinar with one of our other TMSs in the cloud, and we talked about like the compliance process, and traditionally it can be 30 minutes to an hour. And we said, if you take 1,000 loads a month and you say you're booking 70% spots, and that's a new carrier every time, you're onboarding 700 new carriers every month, each one taking 15 or 30 minutes. I think the exercise we did was 30 minutes, and it equated to like 32 business days.
Yeah, you don't need more carrier reps at that point. You need more compliance people. Right?
Yeah. That contributes to cost per load.
For sure.
It's like everything does. Your accountants, your office, the internet, bills, everything's attributing to cost per load because it's a service that brokers provide. So it's like, if you can reduce your cost per load from, let's just say $100 down to like eliminating a lot of the calls, the monotonous tasks. If you can reduce it on just even a subset of freight, 100 of those 1,000 loads, and now your cost on those is only $18 to $30, that's a huge gap, or a huge, spread that now you've got that money back.
I mean, plain and simple, right? It's a win. You've created a win for yourself, right?
Yeah. And that comes with a lot of the hesitation that we hear is like the financial investment. But like, okay, are you really making money today? And it's like, I remember talking to people just like when I was booking freight, I guess, at XPO or Robinson, we'd get so excited about like, $100 winner, but like, damn, did we really make money? No, Chris, we actually need to make 175 a load to actually make money. So
it's funny you mentioned that too, Chris. I think a good point into that, right? Like this type of like technology should be used in to think about it this way: is this is putting you in the conversation with the XPOs of the world, with the Robinsons of the world, because believe me, their tech is getting invested in 100-fold from anybody that's 10 to $50 million, right? Like that's what they're spending on their tech a year. You know what I mean? So these tools that we're talking about, and to Chris's point, I think is where you can see places where you can lower the rate with the carrier, finding something that the market is market relevant and helps them win, and still lower the rate to your customer and still make more margin.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's that it makes too much sense in a lot of areas where you got to get over that initial fear of you're replacing people, you're changing workflows, you're whatever. I mean, if your fear is competition, believe me, your competition's out there. Technology is coming, right? And you just got to evaluate your needs and where it fits into your organization, but it's coming. And the way I always put it is, it's technology is people driven. There's no, this business is in no danger of losing its relationship piece, of its people first piece. It's in no danger of it, right? We are here to help each other out. And I think that's really where technology helps, at least concept in that aspect, leverage our time, information, availability, our people to do a better job and bring it all together.
Yeah. We do a lot of things with the TIA, and I always say, like, competitors aside, like, we're not going to be able to get over another pandemic. I think Bill Gates is predicting like 2024. I don't know.
Oh, sweet.
Can't wait for that.
Jeez. Let me get a ray of sunshine here, Bill.
Yeah. So it's like we're not going to be able to get over this unless we do it all together. Like, in order to get through another one, we've got to do it together. And it was really scary, like things that were going on, and just being in a tech company, like, what the fuck's going to happen, right? And like, there's several layoffs, across the tech industry, and thankfully, like, we're in sort of a recession-proof industry with logistics, but we got to do shit together to make sure that stays the same. And it's like, it brings me to like the risk of failure. And like what I usually ask is like, well, what's the opportunity cost of not risking something? Like what are you doing now that you're risking the possibility or potential of doing something different? Like what's gonna fail? Like what are you not gaining today that you could be risking? And there's not really ever like there's no risk, or sorry, there's no like opportunity that they're gaining today that they're gonna lose anyways. Like it's that's just not there. It's so we're giving them that other.
I think it probably could be labeled risk of comfort, right? Or risk of uncomfort.
Yeah. And
rather than risk of failure, because
for sure.
I think a lot of the view is like, if I don't rock the boat, okay, right? And that's kind of the other side of that recession-proof industry, right? Same time, right? Like, I think it's important that we take a holistic view of, it's not just about, you know, what you said, load count in profit margin, all that. Like, there are people out there depending on an opportunity to have a career in this office. And I want to make sure that they have every opportunity to be the best they can. And I think, you know, if you're limiting the technology coming in through the brokerage, or you're at least looking at or evaluating your needs in how technology can fit them, I think you'll see that you're kind of doing them a disservice in that aspect.
Yeah. I want to talk about your sort of kind of your approach, right? Like your approach to digitization and digital transformation. We've heard a lot, you know, now about the wins and fears, and different than the journey of like tying it back to price, but how you guys looked at technology, like sort of like what was your initial approach to tech? And you mentioned feeling the need for, you know, sort of briefly cover, you know, talk to us a little bit about how you looked at visibility. You already sort of mentioned procuring carriers, but maybe some of the other here.
Well, I guess we kind of turned ourselves on our heads at one point, where we went from a sales ops model to a team model. So my teams are shipper reps, 2 carrier reps, and a load planner. That's a fully built team, and that kind of goes round and round and makes it scalable.
Yeah.
So really where we started to see is, when we originally had that going, when you're doing it all, when you're sitting in there calling the customer, calling the carrier, tracking the truck, you're too busy to know what you have and don't have and don't care, right? Like you mentioned it before, your priority shifted based on what shitstorm came through the window at 7 a.m. Right? So now instead of having a jack of all trade in a couple seats, we're building teams around experts in each one. So how do I approach each of these positions, and what tools can I give them? So really the visibility piece, the way I view that is, when, you know, and I'll speak specifically to Cargo Chief and how it's kind of helped us here. But, you know, when we're talking about the projects aspect of it, right? So the projects aspect of it is, we've got a shipper rep who gets an opportunity from sales or the customer directly, and we put that into the project and we start building capacity, right? That's the procuring. Like now we're building information together, and we're arming each other with all the information. Hey, that's not enough, or the customer's already telling me this. So we're setting those limits up, and we're building our carrier base and procuring carriers based on that. That's just going to feed your information on doing your quotes and RFPs, right? Like I know there's an RFP model in C4 I use a lot, but in the end, it's all based on a couple different sources, right? I think we look historically, we look at, you know, a couple different technology companies that we're partnered with to really dial in our RFPs to capture the loads that we actually want, right? So when we start to look at the RFP portion of it, how many carriers are moving in that already, right? Like, I think where we've batted our heads and we've had some struggles in the past is, we go into an RFP, we quote a bunch of shit, you know, you just took 3 days out of your team's time, and everybody's frustrated, and we probably won't get a goddamn thing. And then you do get something and you fall flat on your ass because you got no carriers to back it up.
Yeah.
Right. So for a while there, we went to a model where we would not put a quote out unless we had a truck. Right. And that was specifically during the pandemic. Right. Like, and that was a pretty good model for us.
Right.
But on the other end, now it's not that way. And we've got to be able to take some risks. So just because I don't have a truck now today for a quote that we're giving, more than likely that load we can get built on a relationship with the customer. We can get that tomorrow or the following day. And using the technology, we can pull the carriers we've procured in those lanes. So they're not just doing new lanes in these projects.
Yeah.
They're consistently managing the lanes that are their top lanes that they're trying to build on, that they see opportunity in. And they're procuring carriers in that and readjusting the rates and saying, hey, you might be my core carrier on this, but I've got I got 10 other carriers that are doing it $200 cheaper. Like I can't hold down the gate any longer. And that's business. And if you've got the relationship built right, you can start to have those conversations and keep that core carrier there. And maybe it's not the full 200 for a little while. Maybe it's the 150, maybe it's the 125 to keep them there. But then you eventually have that other conversation, say, these aren't changing. And I've done my part. Are you going to be my partner? And we found more often than not, we are, right. And they're willing to work with us. The booking piece, I think, we have several different ways and technologies we're using with that now.
Yeah.
But it's just getting out to them faster and quicker, and sometimes in a robust nature, or like, here's all my loads. Go take what you want. I'm saving these for you, and you're the one getting them first. Because that's going to set up a better conversation. I talked about it before, but that's going to set up a better conversation on the other end. Hey, can I call you Friday and do a recap on our week? And we can talk about this for 15 minutes. And hey, how did little Timmy do in his fucking baseball game? Right? Like, we can have better conversations and build relationships instead of sitting around saying, God, book my load, take my load, take my load, take my load. Right? Like, it almost becomes comedic. And the rating piece goes back to the RFQs and all that kind of data. Like, how robust are we? How stacked are we? How good is our foundation? And technology is I guess opposite thinking as it was in the past.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you bring in technology, you're lessening your people. You're building your foundation with better information and arming your people with that to do a better job. Yeah.
I heard the CEO of ChatGPT, for those who know what that is, it's sort of like something apparently it can pass the bar exam at like in the 90th percentile or something crazy like that. And it's sort of like this AI thing. And I heard him talking about people are concerned that AI is going to replace jobs, but his sort of comment was, it's not replacing jobs or not eliminating jobs. It's making more efficient jobs. And that's like sort of a way to think of, it kind of leads us in, I guess, like a collaborative approach, right? Like, you're already doing it. Like, you're already doing some of this stuff. It's just like, how are you like improving that process? Like, when I talk to prospects there, I ask, like, how do you book freight? And it's like, we go to historical carriers, we call them, we send them a couple emails, and then we go post the loads and we take the calls. But like, each individual thing is like, the traditional way of booking freight is so long. I think we broke it into like 13 steps, but can actually be like 28 steps, like, because you got to think about what load you're going to work on. You got to have time to go and figure out what load am I going to work on. Then you got to think about what load, like, how do I navigate to that specific load? Is it by customer profile or what is that process like? And then what's your next step? Like, are you emailing? Are you calling like top 2-3 carriers, or are you not emailing or calling them because you talked to them 2 days ago and they didn't have a truck for you? But damn, more often than not, like, I'd have a load at like that needed to go tomorrow. It was on the board for a week, and I called my carrier. He's like, damn, Chris, if you just called me at 3 o'clock yesterday, I had a truck for you. And it's like that speed is pre-booking is the hardest thing to do. And it's like, if you don't have a way to do that, it's really tough. And it's not all the time that you're going to have a load on the board. You know, you're going to have this freight at some point, or even like working with your carriers, right? Like, or across your team, you know, you're going to have that freight at some point, whether it's like consistent business now, or just an opportunity that you're working on. And really what our sort of C4 projects feature over here on the right, not really going to show the feature, but I guess, Greg, from your point, you mentioned something about like telling your carriers, you know, if you want to take that first spot, you know, at $1,300, giving you higher pay, this is what you got to do, because you also have 10 others in front of you. How do you guys like collaborate with that information across like your shipper team or your customer reps and your carrier reps and managers, and what does that process look like as far as like collaboration with projects?
Well, I mean, the nice part of our projects is, again, we assign it to our reps, right? So we assign it to our team, and then they can get assigned again to a specific rep, right? So we're going after very specific things when we're talking about that. So one, you know, the customer rep or the shipper rep and the sales team can put in a project that they're working on and give the full spectrum of information that's needed, right? And the carrier reps can go out there and do their jobs. Hey, calling on this. Not only is it doing that, but it's pulling the carriers to you. I mean, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Right? These are carriers that actually say do these lanes, and you can search in network, out network, head haul, back haul, right? And know the nuances between those two, because I mean, when I first started in 2001, it was all backhaul, right? Like I was calling Buffalo carriers to move stuff into Buffalo. I was moving stuff back into New Jersey with New Jersey carriers, right? And then, you know, things started to meld together, and now we are where we are. And now people are just taking brokers freight. That's it, which is crazy, right? And I mean, that was not even a thought. So what we do is we assign these very specific, you know, we're getting all the information up front.
Yeah.
There's less time of going back and forth. What if? Do you need, hey, how about this? No, that doesn't. Yes, this does. Now you have it all in front of you, right? And to your point before, right? Like, guys, I need you to go source capacity on these things. Okay. Or if I asked my carrier reps 3 or 4 years ago, hey, are you sourcing capacity on this? Yeah. Do you know where it is? Now imagine if it's organized, right? So that's how we kind of use projects. Keep us on our toes.
Yeah.
No project should be going untouched for very long.
Right.
Let's reapproach these carriers, make sure they're happy, make sure that we're fulfilling our commitments. Is the load count we promised what you're getting? Are you taking what you promised us? Is everybody happy? Are we good? Let's keep that right there. Now you're in this top spot. You know, it goes down to a couple things. How much load, you know, tender acceptance. Are they tracking? Are they easy to work with? You know, I'd rather pay the $100 extra to put a carrier that's going to work with me on a couple of those items.
Yeah.
Than to chase one down for that extra $100, right? And constantly be struggling.
Yeah. Yeah. So you know, sort of, we're coming up to the hour here, but, you know, for those, you know, some of you are probably listening in, or customers, or maybe you've caught some of our other webinars, and we usually tend to promote transforming that, call it transaction, into repetitive business and relationships. So I guess briefly, Greg, like, you know, when you look at like the long-term approach, how would you explain that transformation from like that transaction?
Well, I think, you know, again, it goes back to bringing consistency forward, right? And how much information you can keep in front of you and adapt to the changes of the markets, adapt to the changes of the carriers, because one day that carrier is going to stop running that lane, or that customer is going to stop shipping it, or whatever. But when you get that first opportunity, right, we really want to concentrate on making sure that we're doing everything we can just outside of booking a load, right? To bring that opportunity forward, right? To help everybody involved here, right? From the sales guy on my side to the guy on the dock on the customer side to the dispatcher that should be fielding a 4 o'clock phone call to the on the trucking side. So, full term, it goes back to the relationship and building it. That's where long-term success comes from.
Yeah,
that's my philosophy, and I think Concept's philosophy.
Great. So sort of concluding here, these are some, and we'll happy to send along some screenshots if anyone's interested. I'll actually go ahead and launch this poll here in sake of time. If you want to hear more about Cargo Chief and sort of the C4 platform and want to hear more about some of these results, or even if we're integrated with your TMS, we're not going to share the results here, but just yes or no if you'd like to hear more. Concept, they use TIE TMS, so that is one of our full integrations. These are some of the results that you can typically expect from carrier engagement. Our open rates are, the goal for an email is to get a carrier to open it. If they don't open it, who cares what's in it? So it's sort of like one of the measures that we look at. On average, it's roughly 60% on open rates, carrier reply rates, meaning carriers coming back to you, like what Greg was talking about. That's about half of your freight. You're going to get carrier replies coming back to you of the freight that gets automated and triggered. All coming down to roughly 8% of your freight getting booked digitally. Some other things, we talked about time saved. This is usually what we see across the board, to somewhere around like anywhere from like 2 to 3, 4 to 6 hours saved a day per person, which results in a shit ton of time getting back, and they can do a lot more. Cost per load, of course, and then driving up carrier retention. Since you're not doing the one and done carriers anymore, you're sort of focusing on the carriers that are already set up with you, and that's really sort of the whole kit and caboodle of automating things. I'm going to sort of roll on here to adoption, and we don't really have too much time for Q&A, but I guess the last thing for you, Greg, and your team, what was that aha moment, I guess, for your team, and like how did that drive that instant product adoption?
Yeah, I mean, the team was asking, how do we get better carriers on lanes that we want to have, right? And that's when a need for this technology came in for us.
Yeah.
And that's really where it kind of went full circle for us. That's when I brought them on fully use everything. I think it took us about a month, right, to get into the projects and understand how to work within it. But in reality, I got emails or I got Teams messages next day. This is awesome. Thank you. Wow. I didn't know I could do this. So I think that it really had a direct impact immediately from bringing actual carriers.
Yeah.
Right. Because we're all dealing with the double broker pandemic. I don't think we're out of all the pandemics, I guess.
Yeah.
But these are actual carriers. These are people that want to do your freight. These are people that are doing the freight in that lane anyway, and maybe want to expand into that. So I think that's where the difference came for us really, really quick.
Yeah. And there's, as we conclude here, there's really two user groups. Like there's those who, just like to book freight how they do today. They don't really want to change and move to a different platform. So there are solutions like with TIE TMS that you can just let the integration run in the background, and you don't have to like go to another platform. Although we do allow sort of a full application there on the side. And what, Greg's team uses sort of both is like that procurement role and pricing and RFPs and stuff like that. There's that fulfillment too, to help drive that product adoption. So for those, everyone who attended today, I appreciate you guys listening in, and we'll sort of send out the recording for this if you'd like to share it with your teams. And if you want to hear more about Greg or Cargo Chief, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. Check us out at cargochief.com and see if you're on one of our integrated partnered TMSs and maybe start a conversation there. So just want to thank everybody, and Greg, I appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it, man.
Is it snowing there in Buffalo today? I don't know.
It's a nice day, buddy. We got 40 degrees.
There we go. Right on, man. Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you, everyone. Catch y'all later.
Thank you, guys.